I'm not sure where they are. If you need handouts, they're here. I'll just, Kevin is my assistant, so I'm thanking Kevin in advance. He's been with me since I came in the door, helped me bring my stuff up, and he's handing out information. I did tell him not to feel tortured into staying the second time round to hear me again, but he's been very good, so thank you very much, Kevin, for that. Kevin's a student here at the school, so. All right, I'm going to start. Others may wander in, but I have lots to say and share with you, so I want to make sure, because you're here, that we get going on time. I'm Teresa Hartnett. I work as Director of Family Ministry for the Diocese of Hamilton. I have the opportunity to do all kinds of various presentations, faith, parenting, and also get to go to workshops to hear the experts, so that's even better. When they were speaking, you asked me what did I want to do at this conference. I said I'd like to do the 5 love languages. How many of you have read his book? Not all of you. Adult or children one? Adult? How many have read the adult? So I just want to share, because it's Gary Chapman's work, and we had Gary Chapman into the diocese last year in the spring, or this year in the spring, still this year, and we had over 800 people come to hear him. Many phone calls afterwards saying he made a profound difference in their lives when they understood their spouse's love language, which is what he was speaking to. I spoke to him about using his material here and being able to present on. He said, yes, please do. I want people to get the word out. So I'd like you just very briefly know how he came to this. He's a counselor, and he had people coming into him, his practice. And he said, by all counts, they were saying, I'm not sure that I love my spouse, I'm not sure I want to stay together. And by all counts, he said, they seem to be reasonably good marriages. You know, sometimes he'd want to be married to the person. There wasn't anything really, abusive or those kinds of things. And he couldn't quite figure out why people were kind of feeling like they weren't really loved. So that began him on a journey of trying to process, what is it that makes people feel loved or dissatisfied, those kinds of things. And so he came up with the fact that over and over again, when he spoke to people and studied people, there was these 5 areas that they spoke about in terms of that was their dissatisfying. He never does or she never does anything for me. He or she never spends time with me. He or she never touches me except when we're having sex. Those kinds of things. So he began to piece together this 5 love languages, and out of it, it's had a profound impact on the people that he shared it with. If you read the book, and it's an easy read, honestly, you can read it in a night. As I said, it makes a profound impact in that for many people, for the first time, they truly recognize how many times their spouse is saying, I love you, and they didn't recognize it before. So it's a great book, but today we're going to focus on teenagers and children, because he also does family counseling, and he realized, in fact, if it's between spouses, it would, of course, be the same between children, and yet, there's special ways to look at it when you're dealing with children and teens. So he's written his books on same love languages, but based on how would we do that with our children. So that's what I'm going to be looking at today. So with our children, when we love them, when we raise them, we know we love them. It's a profound impact that we have on them. And I say with my own children, they have taught me more about the love of God than my spouse ever would, although I love my spouse tremendously and wouldn't trade him in for anything. But my children have taught me on a different level, because with my children, I know that I would easily die for them. I would give whatever I had to give for them. If I had to get in front of a bus or take a bullet or give them my heart, if I could, and they need a heart transplant, which I hope they don't, but I would. And so I understood this love of God for us, that he would create everything and then say, now I'm going to trust it to you. You will create what I love most forever, and you will raise them to be good people in the world. I will trust you to do that. We haven't always done a good job, and we struggle to do it because we're human, not divine, but we do work towards that. We always want the best for our children. That's why you're here today. You want the best for your children. So the love languages is a way to understand our children's love needs. Because even though we may love them, they may not feel loved by us. And that's when we set up difficulties and disparities, and we wonder why we do so much, but they're angry and they don't listen sometimes, and those sorts of things. And so the love languages is really about focusing on the way that your child understands emotionally their love language. So Gary Chapman's theory is we all have a love tank. I liken it to a gas tank inside of us. and we need that love tank to be filled. And when our love tank is full, it doesn't mean that our lives are perfect and we don't have disagreements or any of those things, but when our love tank is full, we can take those things and work through them because we feel loved. When our love tank is empty, everything strikes us worse. We feel more angry, more disparaged, more upset, those sorts of things. And so our love language helps us to cope, if you will, with life. And like any vernacular language, we all speak a different language of love. So when I go on a trip and I'm in a country where no one speaks English, I have a difficult time. People might treat you, you're trying to use sign language and tell them what you need. And then someone will say, oh, did you want a cup of coffee? And you think, oh, you speak English, thank you. Because you feel so much more comfortable, so much more understood. That's the way you've got to think about the love language. Because we may not speak the same love language as our children. In fact, many times we don't. And very often, it's very rare that couples speak the same love language. So it's like your spouse is speaking to you in one language and you're speaking in another, and you don't understand that language. Imagine that kind of thing. And what would you do eventually? You would pick up a few bits and phrases and you would try to converse with them in a way that you understood, the same language. So when your children or your spouse speaks a different love language and you learn what that is and what you can do to speak that to them, it makes a profound difference in their understanding that you love them, and vice versa. So it's really all about creating this foundation of love. So, I first want to focus a little bit on teenagers. Well, I'm going to ask the question first. How many of you in the room have teenagers? Well, many of you, and those of you that don't will one day.
Next year.
Oh, well, not even that long away. So I want to, and I'll try to spend less time. It's just I think this is so very important, and it's as important as understanding the love languages, because how we speak love languages for children, little children and teens, are different. So I'm first going to focus a little bit on the joy of teenagers. And some of you may say, okay, already I'm not going to listen to anything else she says. I have 4 children. They are 23 to 29. And I have a new little granddaughter who just turned 6 months old. And I love being a grandmother because I love here. I don't have to look after her. So it's very wonderful. But when I was just a parent of 2 and just pregnant with my 3rd child, in fact I suspected, I went to a conference and the speaker at the conference said, my claim to fame, there's about 400 people in the audience, is that I had 5 teenagers at once and survived. And the entire crowd erupted into this applause, and I, with the little children, said, I don't understand that. What's the problem here? And now I'm telling you, my claim to fame is I had 4 teenagers at the same time, and I survived. So they do get past it. They do grow into older people who look back and say things to you like, wow, Mom, I can't believe what a good parent you and Dad are. So glad that you continue to discipline us and spend time with us in our teen years. When in their teen years, they weren't saying that. So important to know, every piece of research tells us that our children want to learn from us, want to be with us, want to hear what we have to say, but they will never, never tell you that. In fact, they'll tell you quite the opposite. I don't want to talk right now. So we have to get them in the car when they're trapped and things like that. And they're in the bathroom and you're on the other side of the door. So while you're in there, just watch. This is a hard time for raising young, adolescent, teenage people. Violence, drugs, sex, faith questioning, a need for good education, they are more profound more than they've ever been because of this global media that we have, and there's so much out there. More than ever before, our teens need you as their parents to be a guiding light and compass. And I don't use the word compass lightly. They need to know what you know about the truth of life. And it is a challenge when so many things are coming at them. But you have been the voice from the day they were born, and you will continue to be. And they will, when you continue to talk, to set standards, to have morals, to tell them what the expectations are, in ways to say I love you, which we're going to talk about, they will look back to you. So before we can really understand then this whole area, I just want to look really briefly and quickly, I hope, more than I did before where I got too verbose, on this understanding of our teens, because again, you're going to speak their love language slightly different. 60 years ago, about 65 years ago now, maybe a little longer, we're getting to 70, the term teenager did not exist. It became popular after the Second World War. It's important because it's pretty new. It's pretty new. The themes for the teenage culture have not changed much since the 40s. In other words, what teens are, or 50s, the teens are trying to accomplish. They're looking for two things, independence and self-identity. And it's the same for kids that were in the 40s as it is for our teenagers now. Before we had this concept of teenagers, there was an understanding that who you would be as a child would be basically who your parents were. So if your father was a farmer, you were going to be a farmer. If your father was a doctor, you were more than likely going to go to medical school. If your farmer was a vet, you were going to be a vet. So there was sort of this continuity. You were born into a certain era, and that's who you were. With the Second World War and the onset of industrialization, we had this change amongst our young people. And that was that we had more options. We were living in more urban areas. There was more for us to do. And so adolescents these days are not children as they were in the past. They are between two things and they're moving towards something. In the past, you were dependent on your family. You lived at home until you got married. And you were a child. You were considered a child. You did what your parents said and you didn't go against it. Now we have this in-between time when we're learning to be independent and often sort of challenging us as parents because of that. So what is it they're looking for? Well, the search for independence and identity is the bottom line, as I said. In the early 40s, this was impossible before marriage because you lived in your family's home and they told you what to do. But now that's not true. Well, in the past, if you had very rich parents, you sometimes got to go off and seek your independence in an education, but not very many had that opportunity. But now with industrialization, of course, you can learn a trade, you can become a weaver, you can do whatever it is you want to do, so you have to search for it. When you work, and our children often work in these teen years, you have money, and money breeds independence. In fact, as we all know, they have more money than us as disposable income, and the marketers know it too. They don't know commercials. My husband always say, "What a stupid commercial." I said, "You're not the target audience. Not even close. Not even close." So their movement towards developing independence and their own identity has to continue along really a rapid pace in today's world. Our children live in a global society. There's so much coming at them via the internet, via the TV, via Facebook and texting and all those kinds of things. And they have to decide who they're going to be. Who am I at this time? So there's so much coming at them. They express sort of their independence and identity through their music, their clothes, dance, language, relationships, technology, all those kinds of things. And yet in the years of teenagehood, they are actually becoming something that they often are not during those years. In fact, the experts will tell you that many of our children in those years will almost reject a lot of what you were and are, only to come back full circle into their adult years, and especially when they become parents themselves. So there's hope for us. Our children, our teens, face two major challenges during these years, and they're very important for you to know. One is the physical changes, and the second is mental in nature. The first challenge of physical is that they have to accept the changes in their body that are happening more rapidly than at any other time other than 0 to 2. We have this, when a child is born until they're 2, when you just think about everything that they do and change, they learn. The physical changes, this is the only other time we see in human life that we have the same amount of changes. So the body is changing, and it changes at different levels. I told the group before, my best friend in grade 5, she was the tallest kid in the class, the only girl in the class wearing a bra. She was like Miss Maturity herself. And we are the same age. We've been best friends since grade 5. She is the same height she was in grade 5. She wears the same bra size she wore in grade 5. She hasn't changed a stitch. And many other people are in high school, or even 15, 16 before their bodies start to mature. So there's sort of huge disparity of, am I actually ever going to grow up? And the reality is, yes, we all do. And then we want to go back. And so it's a time of great physical change and unrest. They're not sure how to take all this change and what's going on. And we as parents are sometimes silent about it because we're uncomfortable with it too. So we have to be open to our children in terms of talking about the fact that, you know, when you have the 14-year-old girl who is really exactly as she was when she was 9, that you have to say, you know, if you're worried about your body changing, don't be. You're just maybe going to be a little bit older, you know, whatever the case may be. You haven't got your period, don't worry about it. You will, and then you'll be glad that you had years when you didn't have. You know, we have to bring it up and talk to them because it's very difficult for them, those body changes that make them uncomfortable in their own skin. The second challenge is intellectual growth. And this is a time when somewhere between age 9 and 12, our children move towards adult thinking, and they begin to be less concrete thinkers and more abstract thinkers. So now they can take in the world in a different light. They begin to see other families and say, that family's not the same as our family, and I kind of actually like what that family's doing, and I don't like what our family's doing, or those kinds of things. The important piece is, and I do a presentation on the teenage brain, but we don't have time for it today, but in terms of the frontal cortex, which is the last part of the brain to develop, it develops from around that age, you know, 12 or 13, right through now until 22 or 23. So while the 15-year-old may look mature, and at times may sound mature, please understand they're not fully functioning as adults. Their brain doesn't have the same ability to think things through and all those kinds of things that we should get to as adults. Some of us never do. But for all of us, including our teens, our thoughts first go through a little center called the amygdala in our brain, which is the emotional center of our brain. And it goes through and then to the frontal cortex. As we mature, we control the amygdala most of the time. We understand that things happen for a reason, and as I said, if someone comes in late, I'm not going to think my first thought, oh, those people knew that I was going to be terrible and they came late so they wouldn't have to hear everything. That's the emotional center of the brain talking. The frontal cortex says they were probably trying to fill in the sheets and their speaker probably kept them late like I kept my group. So we have some balance. So we as parents need to help our children develop that frontal cortex. And we do that by teaching them to problem solve, by not telling them what to do anymore, but asking them, what do you think is the best course of action for that? What might be another way to do that? Can you think of something else, even though you've given me those two? So we're developing their ability to work with that. So the amygdala will be developed first, and because of that, they will be very emotional. Could you clean your room? Oh, you're always after me, you never leave me alone, you're just always picking on me. All I asked was for you to clean your room. It's an emotional response. And as they get older, they'll respond differently. So they're entering, as I say, this age of reason, where the brain is beginning to develop, and they're going to have more logical thinking. They're going to see the logical consequences to actions, but it takes some time. Some of them get there sooner than others, just like my friend in grade 5 was physically developed and didn't change. Some of our brains are better at 14 to 15 and 16 than others. Some take until 23 or 24 and those kinds of things. But there's my friend Kevin now, he's bringing me water. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. So we have to understand that in these teen years, their argumentative behavior, and many people will say, you know, they're negative, they're argumentative, everything I say is wrong, is that part of developing their mental skills. So there's purpose to it, if that helps you at all when you're going through it. And so we have to engage them and understand that we don't want them to speak to us disrespectfully, but the fact that they will challenge us has purpose in their greater development. And when they get out into the world, we really want them to be able to develop those skills. For our teenagers, they're really confronting personal morality and values as part of this entering into the new functioning of their brain. And so they are learning to analyze ideas and actions in a more, if you will, logical manner. And they are developing the ability to project outcomes of certain behaviors, of beliefs, of those kinds of things. So because of this, it gives rise to our young people at this age questioning, examining the belief systems with which they have been raised. So they will say things to you like, I'm not going to do this when I have my children. And it often causes an emotional response in us, the amygdala first, and we say, you know, all that I give to you, that's instead of saying, as we should and could, when you're a parent, you'll have every right to make decisions that you think are right. I'm making the ones that I think are right for you. End of story. Because that's what we're doing. They don't like that because they would rather that you argue with them. So determining the beliefs that they're going to grow up with, the values, they're really worthy, that are worthy to their commitment is what these teenage years are about. And if we don't take the time to talk, to sit down in conversation, to let them know the importance of values, what our morality is, what our expectations is, how God figures into this world of theirs, and how God is about leading us to a better place. The truth of anything that our religion asks of us is that when we actually do it, our lives are better. We might have to give something in the short term, but our lives are better in the long term. And we have to help them to understand that, because if we don't, they may not see it. So they're really asking questions in sort of areas that are challenging them at this time of their life. What can we as parents do? Welcome the questions. Never get angry when they ask a question, because they'll just stop asking. So whatever their question is, you know, why did you and Dad stay together? Or why did you and Mom do this? Or why do you and Mom decide to have 4 kids instead of 2 like most of our friends? You know, all those kinds of things. Why did Mom not work or Dad not work, or whatever the case may be? Instead of answering with that amygdala, that emotional response, we need to say, that's a great question. Let me share some of the reasons, what happened, whatever you're comfortable sharing with them. Seek to give them honest answers as much as you can. We don't have to share everything with our children, but there's lots that we don't share that would actually be beneficial to them because they care about us and they're looking to find out who they are. When we use a non-authoritarian manner in speaking to them, they will continue the conversation. There are times when we may have to step in as an authoritarian parent when they're in danger and those kinds of things, but in most conversations we have to be soft. We have to encourage them to explore other ideas. So when they ask you why you think marriage is important, your response is, it is, and don't ever think that you're, you know, we can get our, but instead you say, well, I have various reasons that I believe it to be true. Share with me what you think. This is conversation. I liken it to anyone in our lives who's a friend. We all have friends who do things that we think are stupid and not the best interest of themselves or their children or their spouse or someone. And we will often say things to them once or twice, but then we kind of back off. And we introduce our thoughts, and we've all done it, in ways that are stories about other people, or this speaker that I heard, or I read this article. And we're sharing it because we think they could use the information, but we're not telling them they have to have the information. We're in conversation about it. What do you think about that? Hoping that it will stick in their brain a little bit. That's the way we need to approach our teenagers if we're going to truly help them with these areas. This is the time when they are really looking to understand their own sexuality. They learn what masculine and feminine social rules are more fully. They start acting in ways that they don't even understand why. Girls go, oh, no, I can't do that. Oh, could you open this for me? And somewhere in their brain they're thinking, I've opened that for the last 15 years of my life. But now I'm going to tell him that I can't open it because it's a way in. And we don't understand it, but that is just part of our own sort of sexuality moving into the realm of relationship. And so we can help them by telling them stories. You know, wow, I see you in grade 9 now, and I remember my first boyfriend in grade 9, and we tell them the story about that. And they'll be like, ew, don't tell me that. But they actually do want to hear it, and they actually learn from it. Not too many details, please, but they're learning to deal with what's appropriate in sexual thoughts and feelings. If we don't talk to them about that, is there anything challenging you? I can remember when I was in grade 9, I was wondering, you know, should I love someone? Should I do that? Whatever the case may be, then we don't open the door, they might not talk about it. They're learning about the difficulty sometimes of relating to the opposite sex. Most teens are thinking about someday being married and the fact that they want their marriages to last. And if they've seen a marriage that lasts, that might be a little more comforting to them, but in many cases they haven't. And so in our best ability, we need to tell them that this is, I don't want you to think that your marriage, because many people fear this, because my parents' marriage didn't last, mine won't. Not true. Here's what I learned from that experience with your mom or with your dad. In a very gentle and not, they were jerks, and I should never have married them in the beginning, because it is their parent, that's important. So conversations that flow sort of naturally out of discussions, really from the time they're very little, about sexuality, marriage, dating, what we believe as a family. And I want to tell you, I get to go to a lot of conferences around sexuality, and the experts are clear that when we tell our children what the expectations of this family is, it gives them some cement. I know that you're going to see all kinds of things in the media, and you're going to see it on the internet, and maybe some of your friends, but I want to tell you what this family is about, so that they know that this family is about, and then you put your own attachments to it. Might they drift off of that? Yes. But at least you're always pulling them back to where it is that we'd like them to be. If they don't hear your voice, they're certainly going to hear someone else's. So it's important that they do. This is a time where they're questioning the future. There's a common question from generation to generation to generation that we all have. And that is, what will I do with my life? And so many of us today have been beat up, and I love the education system. I worked in it. I was a teacher before I took this job. But I never said to one of the children in my class, if you don't work harder, you'll end up at McDonald's. Because what if they did? How many of us feel that we haven't quite accomplished something because we're not working in some job that was thought to be the job? What life is about is what we do in that job. That's what we believe vocation is from a Catholic perspective. So we do want to challenge our children to use their talents to the best of their ability, yes. But we also want them to understand that it is about choosing a vocation and how we're going to be in that work, so that they can work towards something and feel good about what they do. So what is it the worth, what is your life worth investing in? What are your talents? Talk to them about that. What will give you honest happiness? Because money doesn't buy happiness. Just look at the rich and famous. They're not happy, although I'd like to try that and just see. Ask our children, where can I make the greatest contribution? Where do you feel you can? Point out their strengths. You're so good with people. You should look at something where you're going to interact with people. Or, as I say to my one son, not the most patient person. So you might need to look at your intellectual ability as you're looking. And it's true about that. He's very black and white, and if people are not up to his standard, he's harsh with them. And that's just not good. He's not going to be good in social services. Why? You're screwing up. You need emotional help. Forget it. I'm not the best therapist in the world. So you're not going to show him this tape. Parents can share their own struggles, their own joys, their own disappointments, and looking back, I might have done this. And now I kind of wish I had tried. Take a chance on life. I see this in you, whatever you want to say to them. So this is a time when they're really being challenged to find answers, to find their life before them, and they're not quite sure. There's 5 areas that affect our teens today that haven't affected teens in any capacity in this way in the past. And your teenagers are living it, and you as parents need to be aware and deal with it to some degree. The first is technology. Studies show that teens use the internet 8.5 hours a day socializing on Facebook, Twitter, and all these other things, although they rarely are on the computer now. They're doing it on their phones. But they're on the internet on their phones. 8.5 hours as opposed to about 1.8 hours that they spend on schoolwork outside school. Look at the disparity. And think about what's being poured into them during the 8.5 hours that they're not in contact with someone like yourselves or with their schoolwork. And that, by the way, study doesn't include texting. And we all know how much time they spend on texting. My daughter, when I got my new BlackBerry here from the office, I gave her my old cell phone because, you're in the plan and you can't get out. And she was paying for it. So I've not paid 1 cent for any of my children to have a cell phone. I'm very much opposed to that. If they can't afford it, they can't have it. When they can pay it, they can have it. And I didn't sign on the dotted line, so I'd be responsible if they overcharged paid their minutes and all that stuff. But anyway, she got my cell phone, but the bill still came to me, good news, I got to see. And I said, oh, I opened it by accident and had my name on it. And she would have like 1,000 texts, and I would divide by the month, divide by the number of hours in the day, and say to her, do you do anything but text? And then I realized that text for them is everything, you know, they have to send back K for okay. My husband goes crazy. They have to have the last word. You just wait, there's a text that's going to come back on that. K, see, I told you. But they spend a lot of time texting. So they're doing all of that. And already social sciences are worried about how the brain is changing and the way it forms, and they're forming it in the teen years. Remember, I told you that the brain is developing. And our fact of this face-to-face interaction, which has always been essential to humankind, is becoming interrupted. You watch them, they're out with their friends, and they're texting. And sometimes they're texting each other across the table from each other. It's the most bizarre thing. Sunday night dinner, my kids, as I said, are in their 20s, and I have to have a rule: no phones at the table. It's our night that we meet, no phones at the table. They're like, I can see it. So technology is a major problem. The knowledge of and the exposure to because of it. Violence in movies, in personal life, and hearing about others is beyond anything that children have had to face. We are watching people drown in the tsunami as they're drowning. There was no film cutting because no one had time to do it. We're watching it live. We're watching fires. This is unprecedented in human history. We used to read about it afterwards, and somebody thought about what we should see. So we really need to challenge our children and help our children with that. So technology is a major thing. And just so that you know, on my big pinch, if you have children in the teen years or younger, and they have computers that are not under your control, that are not in a central area of your home, where you can see what they're up to, check the history, you're doing them a disservice. Because we now know that 80% of young children between 11 and 16 have seen some degree or a lot, maybe even addicted to, pornography. And they're learning about sex in a trade that is not loving, not meant to be the love that God created us for. We want them to understand sex is beautiful, sex is wonderful, sex brings people together, it's all good. We're created that way, but we're created that way for commitment. And when they're seeing it here, and they can't tell you that they've seen pornography, if by accident or not, then they don't ask you, is that normal? And they begin to think it is normal. So we have to be very cautious with our children. You're hearing in the media over and over these days about sexting, the thing that the kids don't understand. Again, we've got to talk to our children about it. One of the things I learned very early on as a teacher is children are very different in front of their parents than they are in front of everybody else in the world. And we need to be smart enough to know that. So we need to say, listen, let's talk about sex. What do you think about sexting when people do that? You don't have to tell them you think they're doing it, but hear what they have to say. And when they say, I don't think it's any big deal, your response will be, what? It's a big deal. You're your future. That's what we want to do. But we have to say, so why don't you think it's a big deal? A lot of people are worrying about the future now. You don't think that's a problem. Again, working them through it because eventually they come to that conclusion themselves. Okay, on to the next thing. They have fragmented families as another one of these. So technology is the first one. The fragmented families, either their own or they're seeing people, is a very difficult thing for them because this didn't used to be the norm. Even when I was growing up, we rarely had a person in our class, and I'm not that old, that had a separated or divorced parent. It was a rarity. We knew somebody, but it was a rarity. Now, as we know, there's 50%, and most kids have several friends, and so they worry. So we've got to talk to them about that, or if we are in that situation, we've got to be sure that they're the center still, that we don't bring them into the middle of our relationship struggle and all of that. So the fragmented family is a challenge to them and a challenge to their security in the future. Their knowledge of and exposure to sexuality is unprecedented. They are targeted from the time they're this big on TV, by their clothes, by the commercials, by everything else. To have a healthy sexuality, we've got to be a voice pulling them back to what is good and what is normal and what they should see themselves as. The fourth struggle, neutral, moral, and religious values now We have this world that says religion should have no place in politics. And to a degree, most of us would probably agree, except that we also want a world that lives the values that we believe in. So we don't throw the values out to be neutral, which is what the world is moving to. So we've got to help them. We've got to help them develop their morals, their values, their judgments, the ones that we see as important, that they will carry through to their adult years. And that requires us to talk to them and to know that. Parental love is important. The good news about families and schools that work together is that they certainly can and do impact children in these areas, and there's emotional connectedness that children are looking for. So there are many challenges to our young people, but we need to be sure that we're nurturing their inner spirit, and as they grow forward, they will be strong. They will be able to feel encouraged, cared about, loved. They won't be seeking it, if you will, in all the wrong places. So these are challenging years for our young people. There's no doubt about it. And we have to be sure that we're there understanding what they're going through, working towards independence and self-identity, but not independent of some guiding lights. We never stick them in a dark alley and say, find your way out. We shouldn't in their lives. We should constantly be beaming that light, saying, here's what will help you get there. And in the 5 love languages now, as we go through, we're going to learn a few other ways. So there's 5. I can't spend time on this slide because we have no time, I'm sure. Someone have a watch, can tell me what time it is, what do I have left?
12:15.
What time does it end?
12:15.
Really?
10 minutes. 12:25, yeah.
12:25 it ends, and it's 12:15 now?
Yeah.
12:30.
Really?
12:35.
All right, I gotta go fast. I don't know how that happened.
12:35.
Okay, no, we'll just go until we have, okay. Words of affirmation, I'm gonna go quick. If your child's love language is words of affirmation, it's a very challenging thing. All of our children, all human beings need words of affirmation, there's no question about it. Our children are constantly changing, and we need to affirm them in so that they feel good, whether it's their love language or not. But if we only speak the same way to our children that we spoke to them when they were children, we're going to get into difficulty. So when our children are little, we can direct them more, we can say things in certain ways. As they grow, we've got to change how we dialogue with them. We've got to ask for their input. We've got to explain to them a little more why we expect them to do something. For children, less words is better. Pick up your toys. When they get to be teenagers, I need you to pick up your toys because we're having the relatives over and I want them to think that we actually have a decently clean home sometimes. So we can explain a little more. You know, when we play the same sort of melody to our adolescents,